So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third and possibly final meeting of the Rules Advisory Committee for Division 602, the Place-Based Water Planning Fund. As you all know, my name is Lily Prawl, and I am the Planning Coordinator at the Oregon Water Resources Department. And I am joined today by my colleagues from OWRD, Margot and Kim, who will help support our discussion today. As with our last RAC meetings, this meeting is open to the public and is being recorded. The recording will be posted to the OWRD YouTube channel and linked to our rulemaking website within the next day or two. Just some friendly reminders about how we run these meetings. We ask that if you are not speaking, that you remain on mute. And since we are having our meeting over the lunch hour, if you need to turn off your camera while you eat, that is completely fine. But if you do feel comfortable turning on your camera, that's great too. As we go through our agenda today, we ask that you please use the raise hand feature to indicate when you'd like to speak, and I'll call on you. Because this meeting is being recorded and posted, we ask that you try to limit the use of the chat feature in Zoom as much as possible so that people might be watching later can follow the flow of the conversation. If you are joining us as a member of the public and are not part of the RAC, please remain muted and off camera until the end of the meeting when we have some time set aside for public comment. If you are planning to provide public comment, please indicate that in the chat as soon as you can so we can make sure that we're allocating enough time at the end for that public comment. And then finally, I just want to remind everyone that we have a rulemaking webpage. So if you are looking for any of the materials that we're discussing today, that's where you can find them. And I am going to put in the link to that website in the chat so you can click on it if you need to access those materials. I think I'm looking through. I think we have a couple of people that haven't been here before as part of the RAC. So I want to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. Anton and Brandon, I don't think you've come before either. So if the two of you could just tell us your name, if you're representing an organization, and then any interest or experience you have with place-based planning. And Anton, I'll ask you to go first.
All right, thank you, Lily. My name is Anton Kiono. I work for the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation and their Department of Natural Resources, and I'm representing them here today. The tribes have been involved in several of the place-based planning basins over the years, and very happy to bring that experience to bear in this Rules Advisory Committee. So thank you for having me today.
Thanks, Anton. And then Brandon.
Yeah, thanks. Afternoon, everyone. Brandon Haslick. I'm from the Burns Paiute tribe, and I've been involved with the place-based planning efforts in the Harney Basin for really ever since we started, which seems like forever and a half ago. But it's it's been about, I think, 8+ years. But yeah, representing the Burns Paiute tribe and here to contribute however I can.
Thanks, Brandon. All right, so let's move. I think that's it for introductions. Let's move on to the agenda for the day. We're going to start with a high-level summary of the changes we made to the draft rules based on our discussion last month and some of the emailed feedback that we received since then. And then we'll finish our discussion around state recognition. We'll then move on to talking about match requirements and grant administration. And then hopefully that will bring us up to about 1:30 when we'll take a 10-minute break and then come back to talk about some of the proposals we've received for rules that would expand the scope of the current draft rules, and then hopefully end up with a discussion around racial equity impacts and economic and fiscal impacts of the draft rules today. If there's no public comment, we will make sure to go through. We will very likely go through to 3 p.m. And then just as always, the times on this agenda are estimates, and we'll just adapt to make sure that we're capturing all of your feedback along the way. Before we dive in, are there any questions about the agenda or meeting protocols? Okay, not seeing anything. So, before we get to the RAC2 summary, I say this every time, but I just want to express how grateful we are for your feedback. I hope that you're seeing how your feedback is helping to improve the rules in every new version of them, and how we're getting to a place that's really setting up the rules to make a really effective program. We made a bunch of edits to the draft rules based on your feedback, and catalog that feedback and how we responded to it in a table that we sent out in advance of this meeting. The links to those red line edits and the feedback table are on our rulemaking webpage, and I'm also going to put them in the chat for you here in case, so you can follow along if it's helpful to you. In the interest of time today, I'm going to do a really high-level summary of the changes we've made, knowing that the details are in those documents I just put in the chat. If I miss something that you think we should discuss further as a RAC, please don't hesitate to raise your hand and we can talk about it. But I'm just going to go through some of those high-level pieces today. So, starting with definitions, we made changes to a couple of definitions based on our discussion last month, but the one I wanted to highlight for us today is a brand new definition of a shared governance agreement. We used this term in the last version of the draft rules and just realized that it would be really helpful to define and be really clear about what it means. So we added a new definition. And just to remind you all, this term is used several times in the draft rules, most notably as a requirement of the plan development grants. So plan development grants have to have a shared governance agreement. To draft this definition, we looked at all the governance agreements that were used during the pilot of place-based planning and at other similar planning efforts, and came up with just some fundamental pieces that make up this type of document. The highlights here are that it is a written document, it's adopted by consensus, and it governs a planning collaborative's organizational structures, decision-making processes, roles, commitments, communications, and any other provisions that are needed to support group governance or collaboration. Do folks have any initial feedback on this new definition? Any concerns or things we're missing that you really love it? Whatever you want. Yes, Lisa.
Yeah, I think it's good to have a definition of that. We thought it needed some more detail. In other words, like substantive requirements, like what kind of decision-making process fulfills, the requirements of a place-based planning process, who's eligible to participate in these processes. We've seen some of these place-based processes where, groups that didn't live in the basin were banned from participating, things like that. I mean, it seems like we need to put some more detail into what's appropriate in one of these agreements.
Thank you. Peggy, did you have your hand up?
I did, and Lisa's comments are well taken. That we want to be sure that the people who take this effort need to understand what it is that they're responsible to do. My point was, where's the? I realize this is a shared governance agreement amongst the parties sitting at the table, but isn't that also the state? Where are state agencies mentioned or listed or whatever in this document?
That's a good point. I think in terms of state agencies, it's not currently in this document. The requirement in statute is that they're in consultation with state agencies. So whether or not that means we should include it in here, I think that's a question I have, and it sounds like you might be on board with including them here. Anton, did you have something?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just want to really echo both Lisa and Peggy's point. some of the biggest struggles I think we encountered in our interactions with the planning groups, especially in the early days, was who's eligible and what the role of the state agencies is. These definitely need to be inclusive, and so to the extent that we can capture that in these guidelines, I think it's really in our best interest. Water is a public resource. Everybody has a say in it. It doesn't matter if you live in a basin or not. You need to have the opportunity to be at the table. And I think the same thing can be said for the state agencies whose missions are to responsibly manage these natural resources. They can't be excluded from these groups. Certainly the locals have to be invested, and but that can't come at the exclusion of state agencies, other stakeholders elsewhere in the state. So how we capture that, there's there's the challenge, but definitely I'd want to echo what Peggy and Lisa said there.
Yes, Peggy.
Yeah, I just want to follow up really quickly with that. I guess the whole state agency thing is that part of what Anton was implying is the state agencies, we need to know that the state agencies are going to be there. And that was an issue in the last one. So whether they actually sign the agreement or whatever, but somehow or another, we need to know that the state agencies or the people who are taking this task need to know the state agencies are going to be there.
Thanks, Peggy. Kim.
Yeah, thanks all. I also wanted to just verbalize what Holly put in the chat. She notes, agree with Lisa. I would be open to having more specifics, i.e. consensus tool used, eligibility, etc., in guidance as well.
Thanks, everyone. That's really helpful. I think that I wonder, I have to look back and see what the definition of a collaborative ended up being, because that might address some of those like inclusion pieces. I think we'll have to go back and we'll make sure that that's there, or if not, then we can, adjust this definition. I think that's the true for a lot of, there's like pieces everywhere in the rules that sort of speak to it. And so it's just kind of a question, does it belong here or does it belong somewhere else? But the point is well taken. And then for the specific tools, whether or not it belongs in guidance or rule is also a question, but it should be somewhere. Anton.
Thanks. Just one last thought. And part of the challenge with the agencies was, not just their invitation to be included and that being clear in the planning process, but certainly the agency budget and capacity to do that. Again, I don't know how we best capture that in guidance, but that was a real challenge with some of the planning groups, that the agencies were certainly willing, but they just didn't have the funding and staff capacity to engage as much as they needed. And that really, I think, was a detriment to our ability to make process and to do so in a timely fashion in those basins. So again, I'm not sure how we capture that best, but that needs to be part of this, that our state agencies need to have the appropriate funding to do this work.
Yeah, and I will just note that we later on in our conversation today on rule expansion, we have a piece set aside for interagency coordination, and we'll talk a little bit more about what we can put into these rules and what we might be able to put into guidance, and have kind of like a broader discussion around that. Anything else on this definition before we move on? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone. So let's move on to the eligible grant types section, which is section number 4 in the rules. The only changes here that we made were based on the discussion that we had, just to be clear about the purpose of each of the grant types. We changed the names of the grant types. So the first name was changed from pre-planning grants, which was previously capacity building grants, to planning readiness and evaluation and preparation grants, or PREP grants. I love the acronym. And then planning grants was renamed to plan development grants, and implementation coordination grants was updated to post-plan coordination grants, so that they're more in line with sort of the process of planning. I think I'm just gonna move to the next piece of, oh no, I'm actually gonna stop here. Are there any concerns about these new names? Yes, Lisa.
Yeah, this isn't a concern about the new names, but I did get your comments. Sorry, I missed the deadline though. So, but it seems to me like some of the language in this section, even though it's under eligible grant types, it's actually describing like sort of required outcomes. And so I've struggled with this the whole time with the rules. It seems like some of these, the description of what's eligible really is sort of a substantive outcome requirement. And so I just wonder structurally if some of that should be moved into the next section, but you can look at the comments I submitted on that. You know, for example, eligible plan development grants must be, you have anyway, it's a little confusing to me because I think the language under these descriptions goes a little bit deeper than just describing a type of a grant. So anyway, you can look at what I submitted.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It is, I think we tried to get at it a little bit by changing the name of this section. But if it's still not right, I think we can look at seeing how we can make it a little bit better. Anything else? Okay. So since these red line edits went out, we did get some suggestions from Lisa, and I wanted to just put some of that language on a slide here around plan development grants. And I think the point of your comments, Lisa, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that we should add some language to ensure that the shared governance agreement and the place-based water plan both contain language that require them to meet requirements set forth in OWRD guidance. And so we thought about how we might be able to craft that and put that into rule language. And we agree that it could be helpful. So we added this language here. It further describes what is required for the grant type and is specific in saying what types of requirements will be needed to be followed. So process, content, and structure. And we came up with those three things by looking at sort of what the plan review team has evaluated in considering plans for state recognition in the past. And we think outlining those three things here just sort of helps create a more clear and cohesive process. I know you guys haven't seen this language before, but I wanted just to introduce it now and see if you have any initial comments or feedback. If you need time with it, that's totally okay too. You can always email me with feedback after the meeting. And then depending on what we hear today and on that feedback, we will look at whether we want to include this in the next version of the rules. So any initial thoughts about it? Lisa, I don't know if you wanted to say anything more about it.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. I'll have to look at it some more, but I think it definitely moves it in the right direction. I just had sort of an overarching concern with the rules that we were talking a lot about sort of this process, this place-based planning process, but we weren't really, it wasn't really tied to the actual requirements of those processes. So I think this definitely helps in that direction. So thank you.
Danette.
Yeah, I have a question about the required by the department. Did you say that that piece for the process, content, and structure is going to be the guidance document? And is that
Mhm.
requirement or is that guidance? Or maybe food for thought.
Yeah. It is food for thought. Yeah.
Yeah, I can share that the thought is that like structurally it'd be included in updated place-based planning guidelines. And we would be really clear in that document about what is required versus what might be a suggestion or options that groups can consider. I do think in a program often there are those two pieces, and one of the lessons learned through the pilot phase that we've heard in the independent evaluation, in the regional work group on water planning, and sense of just having that clarity about what those requirements are up front creates that sandbox that people know what is expected of them. And so any guidelines would call out what is required versus, you might consider these tools or these data sources versus this is what you need to do if you want to move towards state recognition.
Thanks, Kim. Anybody else have any thoughts about this before we move on? And like I said, you can always look at it, come back to it. Yes, Mike.
Yeah, hey Lily, just a question. Do we have a definition somewhere else for the planning area? Like, is that well defined somewhere else?
Yep, it's in the definitions.
I thought so. Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Anything else? All right, great. So let's move on to the changes to grant evaluation criteria, which is section 6 in the draft rules. Again, I'm just going to go over the high level changes here. As a reminder, this section has evaluation criteria for each of the 4 grant types, and then a 5th piece that relates to how additional evaluation criteria can be added. For each of the grant types, based on your feedback, we have added evaluation metrics that were originally just used for the plan development grants, and those include the proposed approach to public participation and engagement of environmental justice community. So now that's an evaluation criteria for each of the planning grant types. And the same is true for strategic priorities determined by the director. We also considered your feedback for requiring cost effectiveness as an evaluation metric, and decided that, since we haven't done it before, we didn't want to make it a required evaluation metric, knowing that we might add it in the future through the process that's outlined in sub 5 of this section. But removing it here sort of allows us that flexibility and adaptability to use it if it works, and if it doesn't, we don't have to use it. In addition to those changes, we made for all the grant types, we also updated the prep grants so that it better reflects the required elements of this grant type, replacing the clear and immediate need for capacity to be built with the need for the community to assess its readiness or prepare for place-based water planning. And then for plan development grants, we agreed with your feedback about the importance of A, C, and D. So instead of listing them as ways to evaluate a collaborative's readiness to engage in planning, we moved them to be each their own evaluation criteria. We also heard your feedback that B, which is the history of collaboration in the planning area, could result in overlooking areas that might not have a long history of collaboration. So we removed it, knowing that history could still be a way to demonstrate what's in sub A here. But we agreed that there could be other ways that could be evaluated and should be given equal consideration. So we just removed it as its own evaluation criteria here. We updated the language in A based on some of your feedback about the importance of a neutral process, and including tribes and local governments in the list of entities to meaningfully engage and collaborate with. And then we removed the immediate need for a plan for the plan development grants in the evaluation criteria. And we added an evaluation metric F to reflect the need for state agency capacity to support the planning process. And then finally, we decided, or we received some feedback that removing the requirement for the commission to approve any additional evaluation criteria would allow for more adaptability and flexibility during grant making. And this also is in line with what we do with our other grant programs. So we just removed the commission requirement here. So with all that, I'm going to stop and see if there are any concerns with those changes to the evaluation criteria that we made in the last batch of edits. Yes, Peggy.
If you go back to the first page,
This one?
there, you added, no, right there, you added strategic priorities determined by the director. Can you explain that, how one would use that and where the strategic priorities are?
Yeah. So this was originally just in the plan development grants, and it's really an opportunity for the department to have planning in places where we sort of know, and Kim, correct me if you have other ideas about this, but places where we know that we could really benefit from planning based on our experience on the ground. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Kim.
Yeah, so I'd say there's 3 potential sources of information here. One could be from the statewide integrated water resources strategy, as there are a desire to really make sure that state agencies are supporting the implementation of that. Identify if there are strategies, sort of identify this is the focus, for implementing the IWRS. If there are strategic priorities identified in our agency strategic plan. And then, yes, that third piece where, in our understanding of where conditions on the ground, either recent or upcoming groundwater study investigations, all it's like that sort of, there's that special mix where the timing is just really important for moving that place forward.
Oh, let me follow up really quickly. So
Mhm.
how would I know that if I were going to fill out a grant request?
Yeah, thanks, Peggy. Because the first 2 would be publicly available and clear, which makes them, I think, more solid footing. And that third one, I think we can reflect on that. And would that be clear? And is that fair to folks?
Thank you. And I don't know, maybe it could be, part of that could be in the guidance stuff, but it would seem that it would be important to know how I can score better.
And transparency, right? That transparency is really important on all fronts.
Lisa.
Yeah, thanks. It sort of relates back to my earlier comment about the content of the eligibility section, but it seems like one thing that's missing from, say, number 2, the evaluation criteria for the plan development grants is something like commitment and ability to develop a plan that adheres to state guidelines and balances in stream and out of stream needs. Oh yeah, that's what I proposed. Yeah, I mean, because as it's written right now, there's no sort of substantive criteria as far as developing a plan. So I thought that would be important to add, and there may be similar language to add to subsections 1 and 3, but I didn't do that.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, so Lisa had sent her some of her comments ahead of time. So I just put this on a slide so people could kind of see what she's proposing as an additional evaluation metric. So this is not in your red line edits, but is a proposal. So I just wanted to see what folks think of it, if there's any initial reaction to adding this. And at least idea of this and spirit of this into the plan development grants evaluation criteria. Yes, Peggy.
I guess I'll leap in. So it seems to me a reasonable addition. Certainly, that's what we want as an outcome.
Mike.
Yeah, I'll jump in too. Um, so Lisa, just thinking, what are we missing here with the existing rules that this I guess solves? Is it sort of stating out loud the balances in stream and out of stream interest? Is that sort of the key addition here that was lacking?
I think it's more about development of a plan that adheres to the guidelines, right? Because you do have balance of in-stream and out of stream in subsection A, right? Which is the process has to have a balance of interests. But when you go through the other criteria here, nothing really talks about like the ability to actually develop one of these plans, which is what the money's for. So
Yeah.
I think it's I think it's more about the actual development of a commitment and ability to develop the required plan.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with the spirit, how you demonstrate the commitment and the ability. I guess I'm noodling on a little bit, but yeah, I have no objections, Lily, to what's been added here, but just wanted to create some conversation about it as well. Make sure we're adding stuff that's really going to keep moving us forward, but I like it.
Thanks, Mike. That's really helpful.
Lily, I did want to go back to the earlier point that Peggy brought up when you close this loop here. I know there's some other folks that might want to chime in, but
Does anybody else want to chime in about this particular potential addition? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone. Can reserve your right. Bring it up later. Mike, go ahead with.
I had the same comment as Peggy regarding the strategic direction and that new ad. Could you go back there and look at that one more time? I just think the way it's written, it does, give someone the impression that, the director's going to be back there looking and picking some winners and losers. And I think that you could dispel that with maybe just expanding on this a little bit, including some of the criteria that you mentioned. And yeah, that would make it more transparent for folks like Peggy and us that might go through this process and, want to make sure we're scoring, hitting on all the right points, right? So maybe like stated strategic priorities as determined by the department, like such as the integrated water, something like that. I understand there's always going to be some director discretion out there and some prioritization, but the way this is written right now, I kind of went exactly right where Peggy probably did was, who's picking, who's choosing here, and what are the strategic priorities we're lining up against. So anyway, my 2 cents.
That makes sense. Thank you. Anything else on that before we move on to another proposed addition? Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, I just had a question on sub 5 where the additional evaluation criteria could be brought in at some point, and thought that was a little concerning if somebody's already submitted an application and then they might wonder if the criteria could change while their application's being reviewed.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in the language right now that it says that all fund solicitation and application materials must reflect any new evaluation criteria before the commencement of a grant application cycle. So they would not have any like surprises. There's new evaluation criteria that you that weren't available to you when you were writing your application. And I think when we look at grant cycle, it's like starting with the announcement. It's not like 3 days before the deadline. It's like when we announce the program, all the evaluation metrics would be in there in the solicitation materials.
Okay, thanks.
All right. I'm gonna keep moving. The other proposal that Lisa had included in her materials was to add to this section language around a commitment to using a neutral facilitator and then adding a definition of facilitator. We discussed the idea of a neutral facilitator last time, and we kind of heard mixed feedback about adding it as a requirement in rule. So we initially thought it might be a better fit for guidance, but we're open to hearing more discussion on the topic. I put Lisa's suggestion sort of up here so people can look at it. And then Lisa, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to this piece.
I mean, I guess I would just say that being in place-based planning process is, you know, it's clear that this is a really important part of it. And so it does seem worthy to us of including in rule, and I'd also included that in the right, in some of the evaluation criteria as well. So I mean, I'm open to being disagreed with on that, but it does seem a particularly important piece of this.
Yeah, Peggy.
So I guess my question is, the neutral party is fine, but with subject matter expertise, that presumes that it's water subject matter. It says to facilitate meetings. I want to make sure I understand, because if we're asking somebody to be a facilitator with water expertise, it becomes harder to find a neutral, what people perceive to be a neutral facilitator, when facilitators are supposed to be not have an opinion. So, and I'm also concerned about whether or not there are enough of people with that kind of expertise who would be neutral, it would be perceived to be neutral.
Thanks, Peggy. Anton.
I think that's a really good point. You know, I think what we're looking for here is just someone to, you know, run these meetings and draw out collaboration. I don't know that necessarily we need to prioritize subject matter expertise. And I think that is going to make it harder to find that person. You know, if they have that, that's great. But I think having someone run the meetings is it's a different skill set, a very important skill set than actually, knowing a lot about water law. So I do share Peggy's concern on that, but definitely, agree with Peggy and Lisa that I think it's very important to have that in there. And some planning groups where an agency's kind of been thrust into that role, it hasn't been fair to the agency. It's a difficult role for an agency to try to facilitate and then be a regulatory entity. So I really strongly agree with including that facilitation requirement. But yeah, we might want to rethink the subject matter expertise criterion there. Thanks.
Thanks, Anton. Kate. No, we can't hear you.
Kate, you might be double muted. Sometimes that can be muted on the phone and then in Zoom.
Wait, can you hear now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm having issues today. Yeah, not to be the dead horse, but just to share how it works in the Deschutes. I understand why subject matter can be helpful because water is so complex and it can be hard to facilitate. The way that we handle that here is we have neutral facilitation through somebody without water expertise, and then DRC brings the technical expertise to support the group. So it could work in different ways, but it might be useful to not lock that in this, not require that. So there's some flexibility in different places.
Thanks, Kate. Lisa.
I would just say those were great points, and I'd be fine removing the subject matter expertise. I'm convinced.
Great, love it. Any other thoughts on this before we move on? Yeah, Kim.
I'm just interested in folks' thoughts. Similarly, I think I hear the spirit is to make sure that the products coming out of a collaborative are, in line with the principles of place-based planning. But are folks proposing that it's the facilitator who reviews the documents and the plan to make sure that the content follows the place-based planning guidelines? Because if they don't have that subject matter expertise, I don't think they would be able to do that. I see a facilitator as more guiding a process as opposed to documents. But I'm curious what others think on that.
Peggy.
I got it, and I didn't link that. I guess a facilitator with skills would be able to read a guideline and whatever, and reflect the work of the collaborative by what he or she has heard during the work of the collaborative. So it was a good thought, Kim. I'm not sure I have the same concern, but maybe some others have a better answer.
Lisa.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thinking there is just, somebody that's helping develop the documents based on what's coming out of the collaborative should be accountable, to what's in the guidelines, and should be ensuring that those documents meet standards. But maybe that's sort of a given. Maybe it doesn't need to be stated here, but I think that is an important role. And maybe not every process. Yeah, maybe it's true that not in every process is the facilitator doing that task. So we may be, our view of this may be sort of colored by the processes that we've been involved in. So maybe it's extraneous language right here.
Thanks, Lisa. Mike.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I don't think the facilitator necessarily, they could assign, that responsibility to within their effort, right? So I worry about tying too much specifically to the facilitator, explicit responsibilities here. Does that kind of answer your question, Kim, in terms of, because you were looking for specific responsibilities to tie to the facilitator, and that would be kind of the point of contact and writing that in here, but maybe to a degree.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the language is clear, that when we're that is generally something that can be interpreted similarly by everyone, and just trying to understand the underlying intent, and we can always, massage the language to make sure that it meets that intent.
Okay.
Yes, Peggy.
Thank you, and that's helpful. And instead of ensure, I think that's the word that is of concern. The biggest word is you're sort of making that the facilitator's responsibility. So somehow or another, if you can massage that, because the concept I think that is needed here is to make sure that someone in the planning process of the group does do these things. But I don't know that the facilitator's responsibility, but someone needs to. So figuring out how to say that would be helpful.
And it might even be more of the role of the convener to be doing some of these things and not a facilitator. But Lisa, sorry, did you have your hand up?
Sorry, I was just gonna add that it could be the convener, but yes, somebody has to be responsible for this task, and it's not really written into the rules.
So we can take this and sort of look at the language and see, like, now that we understand a little bit better about like what the constraints on it are and what the spirit of it is, we can work on some language that would fit into rule and sort of fit into the rules as they're written now that try to capture some of this. Okay. Anything else before we move on to our next topic? All right. Not seeing anyone. Thank you for all of that feedback. We are going to move on to state recognition. As you recall, we started talking about this section last time and broke that conversation up into two main components. The first was the process for achieving and maintaining state recognition, which are bullets 1 through 4 of the rules of this section. We pretty much wrapped up that discussion. So I'm just going to go over the changes we made to that section, and then we'll move on to the conversation we just started last month about the second component, which is what does state recognition mean for agency support in the IWRS. So in response to some of the concern over clarity about how a collaborative may amend its plan in response to changes required from the plan review team, we added some language here in sub-bullet 2 to help further clarify that process. It now says, if the plan review team requires changes to recommend the plan for state recognition, the collaborative will be given an opportunity to amend its plan before a final recommendation is made. So just creating that space for some feedback within the state recognition process. No changes were made to sub 3 about how a plan is recognized. And then in sub 4, which talks about how to maintain state recognition, we added the language discussed at the last RAC meeting to have reporting reflect progress made towards implementation to account for the differences in timelines for implementation for different projects. We also added that progress should reflect a specific plan's implementation strategies along with the balance of in-stream and out-of-stream water interests. Are there any concerns about this piece, this process for achieving and maintaining state recognition? Okay. Not seeing anything. So let's move on to what does it mean? So because we just started this discussion last time and it's been a month since we talked about it, I'm just going to go through the materials we used to develop the language for this section again as a reminder, starting with agency support. The related statute for this role is on the screen. It says that the commission may adopt rules, including rules that describe how the implementation of actions outlined in a state recognized plan may be considered and supported. Lisa, you have your hand up. Is it about the process and for achieving and maintaining state recognition?
Yeah, it is. So we can.
Right, yeah. Yeah, let's go back to it.
Okay. So, I'm sorry, can we skip forward?
Yeah.
I'm not quite ready.
No problem. Okay, so this is the statute. This was a work group recommendation D around this, which recommended agency support through examination of potential actions, incentives, or strategies that would advance implementation of plans within each agency's mission and priorities. And then we ended up with this language, sub 5, the department in consultation with other relevant state agencies shall support the implementation of state recognized plans to appropriate to their mission, authorities, and priorities as capacity allows. In response to some feedback, we also added language requiring documentation and communication to the collaboratives of which plan strategies may be supported. And then I'm just going to put this next slide up to help us as we talk through this rule. I heard last time that it would be helpful to sort of have the statute and the draft rules side by side. So I put that on this slide as we talk about agency support. So let's, Lisa, I don't know if you have if you figured out what you wanted to comment about the process, but or the achieving and maintaining, but let's stick with this for now and then we'll go back if that works. Okay. So for this piece, this agency support piece, what do people have feedback on this? Do you have concerns about the draft rule as written? Do you like it? Is it clear? All feedback is helpful. Lisa.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've talked about this in previous meetings, but we do not support the language that says the department, in consultation with other agencies, shall support implementation. That there's actually no statutory basis for that. We think it's also a vague term in this context. I mean, what does it mean to say shall support? Does it mean you'll seek funding, you'll change a rule? I mean, what does it really mean? And then in addition to that, I think, and this kind of goes back to some of the earlier discussion, we have a place-based planning process that, I think is not well defined enough to be able to say, like, whatever comes out of that, the agencies shall implement. So we feel very strongly about this. We think it's not consistent with the statutes on place-based planning, and that word should be a may, because of course there is good stuff coming out of place-based planning, and the department, should have the discretion to take some of those ideas. But that's one comment on this language. We also think that instead of saying as appropriate to their mission, it should be limited, like only if consistent with their mission and priorities. And then I'll just go through the next one too, which is this new requirement that the department shall do this analysis and communicate back to collaboratives. We are not sure where that's coming from. I mean, it's not in statute, and so it seems to kind of place a burden on the agency that's sort of ambiguous. So I'd be interested to know sort of the source of that language as well.
Thanks, Lisa. Danette, or Peggy, sorry. Oh, good. So, Danette, go ahead.
Yeah, I had the same kind of question as Lisa. What does it mean to support? And then I'm also wondering, I'm reading what's on the screen here a little bit out of context with the overarching part of the statute, but why is the part in red only limited to WRD when it's in consultation with other agencies?
Yeah, I think that I can sort of address that piece of it, and then I want to hear from everyone else too, but we can't put in our rules that ODF&W must do something. So while it would be great if we could all get on the same page and document and communicate to collaboratives. I don't think that we can put in our rules that you have to do it. Kim, did you have something to respond to that comment?
Yeah, I think we wanted to be mindful of our sister agencies' autonomy in that regard, and mindful of our authority. I also wanted to note in response to Lisa's comments, the intent behind that language of documenting and communicating is in response to just feedback that we've heard and questions of like, what are state agencies going to do? And that at a minimum, we can note what parts of a plan we feel align with our mission, that we have authority to do, because we should not act outside of those authorities. I like your suggested language there. And do we have the capacity to support? I think support can mean a number of different things, and it ties back into that authority piece.
Thanks, Kim. Peggy.
So I hear the conversation, but I am very concerned that this really focuses only on WRD's role support. And although I understand that these are WRD's rules and therefore can't recognize the responsibilities of others, there must be some way to add verbiage here that implies that other agencies may, whatever, somehow or another, that other agencies have roles to support the work of the collaboratives, because the work being asked of or responded to by the collaboratives may have nothing to do with WRD and may have entirely other agencies' roles instead. So somehow there needs to be some at least recognition, even though you can't actually direct them. Anyway, thanks.
Thanks, Peggy. Harmony.
Thanks. Hi, I'm sorry I'm late to join the party. I'm strongly supportive of inclusion of this language. This has been a longstanding question by places doing planning, and was of great interest to the commission, and I believe it still is. I agree with Lisa's comment regarding changing the language to consistency with. I appreciate the inclusion of capacity, because I do believe that's a significant constraint. I believe the department has the discretion within this language to determine what they can and cannot support, and will clarify that support in writing. And I think that clear communication back to the planning groups is really important, and I appreciate the inclusion of language that would allow for that very clear written communication, so that places have a clear expectation of what might be supported by the state. I agree very strongly with Peggy's point regarding like inclusion of some language around consulting with other state agencies to clarify what those agencies might do with regards to supporting implementation of the plans. And again, I think all of this is just really mostly about clear communications about what can be expected as a place-based planning group moves into implementation. Thank you.
Thanks, Harmony. Lisa.
Yes, I think you used the word discretion there, Harmony, and I think the right word then is not shall support, or the right term. Shall support is not a discretionary term. You would use the word may, which is the word that we think is appropriate there. And I think that I appreciate the desire to be clear about what these plans mean and what the department may do with them. I think that is important, but I don't think that's what this language does. I think if that's what we're trying to do, we need different language here.
Harmony, did you have a response to that?
Yeah, I do. And I would appreciate if others who feel strongly about this as well would contribute to the conversation. I do believe shall is the right term, and I think it's a matter of degrees, and I think it's the matter of degrees that are at the discretion of the department, but I think if they are state recognized, there should be an expectation of support for implementation. Thank you.
Thanks, Harmony. Peggy, you've been waiting for a while, so I want to.
Well, I just want to throw in something to the side of the shall may. I get both of those arguments because implied with the shall is that whatever project they come up with is something that the state is going to fund. And that's a separate conversation when you get to actually project implementation. So I understand the argument between shall and may, but I want to go back to the fact that you're only talking about the department doing something. And are we going to have to ask the other agencies to adopt rules, mirror images sort of these rules, since they are all a part of the the planning process, and not just WRD? It just happened to be housed in this agency, but there are a group of agencies who are responsible. So I just want to throw that out. They're not going to be thrilled, but if that's the barrier, I find we need to deal with it.
Lily, if I can respond really quickly, I don't think other agencies have the authority to adopt rules related to this unless they have just general rulemaking authority. But I think we did hear the point about the underlying of having the sister agencies somehow articulate or identify that commitment. And I think we just need some time to reflect on what is a way to do that. But I don't think that they can adopt rules related to this program.
Thanks, Kim. Lisa?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if, because there seems to be maybe different opinions about what shall means here. And so, I'm wondering if maybe just the structure of this isn't adequate. I mean, it's maybe a more in-depth conversation than we're going to capture in one sentence with the word shall, or as we would say, may. And so I just throw that out there. This is obviously a hot button issue with a lot of different moving parts. And so I guess I would just suggest that maybe this is not, this one sentence is not going to be enough to sort of wrap, give it the treatment that it needs.
Thanks, Lisa. Mike?
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts on this one. I wonder if shall recognize would be a different direction to go. I don't get too hung up on the shall. It's really what the what are we doing when we shall do it? I wonder if that would be a compromise that the group would entertain. And then maybe a second thought would be if we did recognize state recognized plans appropriate to their mission, as the sentence goes, maybe there's a specific time you could include in there, like at time of budget development, at time of governor's budget. I think there's maybe a trigger in there that provides clarity that the department is going to recognize and consider these plans as they go through their normal process. But just a couple of thoughts to kind of keep the red line going here, or the thoughts going.
Thanks, Mike. Danette?
Thank you. I'm wondering if the two sentences can be combined using shall, but then it's offsetted still with as capacity allows. So there is somewhat of an out. That makes it a little bit weaker. But if you just combined it and said the department in consultation with other relevant agencies shall document and communicate to the collaboratives which plan strategies would be supported.
What do folks,
in accordance with the missions, whatever.
what do folks think about that?
Because that way we're all still talking about it, and it could still be the departments supporting it, but you have other agency input into that process.
I think that's elegant.
Okay. Thanks, Danette. I feel like we came to a solution. We will have another opportunity. You'll have another opportunity at these rules. So we'll take that suggestion, reflect back on everything that was said today, and include it in the next version of the draft rules. Moving on, the next piece about what a state recognized plan means is what it means for the IWRS. And I think this is the relevant statute. The Water Resources Commission shall consider state recognized plans when updating the IWRS. This is the recommendation from the work group. The state may use state recognized plans to identify common themes across basins to inform updates to the integrated water resources strategy. And this is what's in the draft rules. I'm actually just going to throw this up on the next screen because it has the side by side with the statute and the rules. Plans that achieve state recognition before the department begins updating the state's next integrated water resources strategy shall be considered in the update. The department shall identify and may incorporate common themes or strategies emerging from state recognized plans into updates and any associated work plans as appropriate to the department's mission, authorities, priorities, and as capacity allows. So I'm going to do sort of the same thing as before and open it up for discussion. Yes, Peggy.
So I'm going to bring the same comment I made in the last conversation. This implies that only WRD may incorporate the common themes and strategies and not other agencies. And somehow or another, we need to make sure that if there's common themes around from related to other departments, that it needs to be added to the IWRS, which does actually talk about more agencies.
Yeah, thanks, Peggy. Kim, go ahead.
Yeah, I wonder if in similar to the previous one, we can add text about in consultation with those other agencies as a way to address that.
Harmony.
I would encourage the department to think about the different aspects of a place-based plan that may be considered and may roll up to inform a statewide strategy, including more specific, depending on the technical contents of the statewide strategy, there may be place-specific information that comes through in the place-based plans that is not captured at the state level, or might be different than, what's captured at the state level. Identification of critical issues in place-based plans should be considered, as well as the strategies. I think the thing that I struggle with this language is the state only going to include those common themes, or also recognize the kind of place-specific issues and strategies alongside what might be in common across areas? So I think it's important to capture both. What are those things that all places might have in common, the common themes, as well as getting at the area or place specific issues and strategies. And I would argue that the place specific issues and strategies is very consistent with best practice across the Western states of how they are using their place-based or regional plans in the statewide planning documents. And I would urge the state to follow suit in adopting best practices from the rest of the Western United States. Thank you.
Thanks, Harmony. I think just really quickly in response to your comment, we did sort of have in the previous draft, we had this laid out as like there were two pieces, the common themes and then the strategies. And for just conciseness sake, we merge them together in this new language, but we do have incorporate common themes or strategies still in the language. It's just not as clear maybe as it was before. Kim, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I also appreciate hearing what I think is a different interpretation than what was intended. Like when I think of common themes, I don't think that means it is a requirement of all places, right? There might be some common themes experienced by basins on the east side or the west side, right? And that can be noted. So it's a good clarification of if others don't have that same understanding of the word, so we can make sure that language is clear. And yes, I want to acknowledge that per the statute change for the IWS, the IWS will be required to identify critical issues by basin in the next iteration, and place-based plans could be a source of that information.
Thanks, Kelly. Any other? Oh, yes, Lisa.
Yeah, I have a couple things. One is I think this should also say, instead of as appropriate, in that third line from the bottom, only if consistent. That same edit that we had before. I also would suggest, first of all, and maybe this is unnecessary, but I would suggest saying the department may identify and maintains discretion to incorporate common themes or strategies. I mean, the strategies piece is not in the legislation, right? The legislation is about themes. So I think we need to be careful about, because we're adding strategies, I think we need to be careful about how we say that. And then we also had a question, I think it's come up in some other RAC meetings, about what do we do with the plans that achieve recognition before these rules go into place? These rules are putting some more rigor into the process and the substance of these things. So, we would suggest that, well, first of all, yeah, that we have some language about what happens for plans that were adopted or recognized rather prior to these rules going into place. And I mean, we would suggest that like either just saying that these rules don't apply to those plans, but that those plans can go back through these rules, or there may be other ways to do that, but I think we need to address kind of the apples to oranges situation there.
Thanks, Lisa. I think I can just sort of address your last comment. I think in the absence of adding any additional language, I can sort of talk about what we've talked about internally about what would happen to those collaboratives that have already have state recognized plans. Their process for state recognition is not substantively different than the ones that are in the draft rules right now. They went through a plan review team evaluation process and were recognized by the commission based on the guidance that was available to them at the time. And so I think they would continue to be, the rules would be in effect when they're adopted. And so then they would continue to be state recognized. They would also have to maintain state recognition according to the new rules. And in any future, post-plan recognition grant opportunities, they would have to follow the new rules and the new guidance as well as part of that. But that's sort of like what we have talked about internally as the pathway for them with the adoption of the new rules, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, I think that is a concern because, again, we had processes go forward prior to adoption of these rules that I think didn't meet the definitions under these rules for example, who could be eligible to participate. And so, I don't think that those earlier processes are really substantively, not across the board, not saying across the board, but I think there are plans that went forward previously that do not substantively sort of adhere to these rules. So we would have a concern with that approach.
Thanks, Lisa. Peggy.
So I don't have a comment about that, but I was going back to listening to Harmony's issue around individual. And it sounds like maybe the department already has dealt with that with the IWRS new draft update. But I just was wondering if incorporate common themes or individual strategies, just adding the word individual before strategies would be helpful, or if that totally messes up everything. Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy. Lisa.
Yeah, I think, we do have concerns about taking site-specific strategies and sort of placing them into the IWRS. If they are, I think you would need some language over what are you talking about there? Certainly a strategy that was developed for one area that is, specific to that area shouldn't, you'd have to be careful about what you mean by putting that in an IWRS, statewide IWRS, and I don't think we've really spelled that out here. So I just have some
So I didn't
concerns
see
about
it as a problem since it says may and not shall. It says they shall identify, but they may incorporate. Doesn't say they have to.
Anything else? Lisa, I think yours is just a legacy hand that's up. Is that right? Okay. Thank you all. It's really helpful, productive conversation. I think we can get through maybe match requirements before we break. So I'm gonna keep moving and at least introduce them and have an initial discussion around them. Try to keep us on schedule before we break at 1:30. So just rearranging my brain. Let's get to match requirements. This is a new topic for today, when we haven't talked about yet as a RAC. So there are 2 sections that deal with match, but I think it's easier if we tackle it as a topic. So I've pulled the relevant rule from section 3, and we'll talk about that with the match requirements that are in section 5. First, a related statute. This one is really straightforward. In awarding grants, the department may require cost matching by applicants. Similarly straightforward is the work group recommendation around match. Recommendation O, place-based planning grants should require applicants to cost share either through in-kind or cash matching. And then I just wanted to give some context that might be helpful as we talk about this through the pilot experience, and folks that have been involved in the pilot, feel free to add in on this, but every pilot group used match funding. The amount of match that they used generally reflected the costs of their planning processes and kind of ranged from about 35% to 70% of their planning that was funded through match. The types of match also ranged. In-kind match is important, as many collaborative members were not paid by the grant to be there, so their meeting time is considered in-kind match. Planning groups were also successful in getting cash match from private foundations and other state agency grants, and at times planning group members would sponsor a meal or a meeting or contribute a cash match directly to the group. So thinking about all of that and looking at our other grant opportunities so that we remain consistent about how we handle match as an agency, we developed the following draft rules around match. The first is that match requirements shall be included in the announcement for each grant offering, and that match requirements shall not exceed 50% of the application request. I just want to focus on this one for a second and clarify that this 50% is a ceiling and not a floor, which means that we'll never require more than 50% match for a planning grant. Applicants can always choose to provide more match than 50%, but it will never be a requirement that they do so. So setting the ceiling allows us to adjust the match requirement up to 50% as needed, as we consider factors that might influence that number, like how much money we have in the fund, and the state of the economy at the time of grant funding. I'm going to pause there. Kate, did you have your hand up?
Sorry, Lily, I do, but for the second one, so I put it down.
okay.
I didn't want to. I'll just leave it there until we get there.
So then moving on to section 5, which is the grant application requirements, which are focused on match. So part 1 of this is very similar to our other grant opportunities. All applicants must demonstrate the required matching contribution has been secured or is being sought at the time of application. Department funding may not be released prior to secured commitment of the other funds. Pending commitments of funding must be secured within 12 months from the date of the award. And the reason for this is it really sets grantees up for success and makes sure that the local commitment is there, and that planning processes don't get stalled because they are lacking that match, that critical match funding. Okay, Kate.
Thanks. Yeah, I think this is consistent across state grant programs, so this may not be productive for you all, but as someone who manages a lot of grants, if every grantor required that the other matching funds were in hand before funds were distributed, we would never do a project. It's like a chicken and egg kind of thing. So most of our other funders besides the state do not operate that way, but we do have to demonstrate match by the end of the project, and maybe there's some in-between ways. But this, in this case, with so much potentially being in kind, it might not be so much of a problem. But if you have a multi-year planning process, we often get private foundation funding on a yearly basis, and so it comes in throughout the process. So just something to think about, that just generally for grantors, if every grant source did this, there would be no projects. So it's something I just wanted to flag for the group.
Thanks, Kate. Kim.
Yeah, just in response to that, I think it's important to understand how we viewed what secured. Secured does not mean cash in hand, like an award letter or some other demonstration of that the funds are coming, even if they might not directly be there, is sort of our standard at WRD. Understanding that a number of folks do reimbursement processes, right? So you're never going to have the cash in hand. So we could make sure that that is clarified if that is unclear and a concern in the language.
Harmony, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I can imagine that some of this is coming from the other grant programs within the agency. Sorry, I have like perpetual frog in my throat today. I don't know why. But place-based planning is unique in that, a single entity or a couple of entities are taking on a monumental planning process on behalf of a geography. And with that can come, it's a significant expenditure of like time and capacity. And it's really not for the benefit of the fiscal agent. It's not for the benefit of the convener. It's really for the benefit of the basin and therefore the benefit of the state. And so I just hope that the department can keep that in mind, especially around match, that these are not projects that are going to benefit any single user. It really is going to benefit the whole. And so people or fiscal agents and conveners can be in the position of being, I don't know, it's a really tough job is all I'm trying to say, holding all of these parties together, assembling all of the grants to move through a multi-year planning process. And I would encourage the department to think about the challenges of that and how the barriers erected around this funding will actually probably disincentivize people from wanting to be the fiscal agent or the convener of these processes because they are very, very difficult. I think 05 is overly restrictive. And I have really significant concerns about how this would be managed by grantees. Again, because these are not specific projects, they are these more nebulous projects, or I can't even call them projects. It's not a specific project like feasibility study grants or water project grants and loans. It is by its nature very different. And I do believe that it requires greater flexibility on behalf of the department. If we think of the department as really the seed funding or the magnet for other funds, in my experience, it was a very good magnet, but it's really hard for the department to put itself in the position of requiring applicants to have their ducks in a row for what will be a complex multi-year, multi-stakeholder process that benefits all.
Thanks, Harmony. I think let's go to the next part of sub 5 and then it's not seeing any hands up here. So this is, and this might help sort of with that contextualization of what match looks like. So in sub 2 of this, it lays out what match contributions can include. And that is associated and documented expenditures that were incurred prior to an award and approved by the department for match purposes. And so that might be like, you know, some of that initial organizing and meeting that happens before a grant is awarded can be covered as, or can be counted as match to an award. It can include cash on hand. It can include that secured funding commitments from other sources that Kim mentioned, or pending commitments of other funding sources at the time of application. And then the value of in-kind labor, equipment rental, and materials essential to the planning process. So with that, are there any other comments folks want to make about match requirements? Yeah, Peggy.
Oh, what the heck? No, seriously, in selecting the grants, obviously you say no more than 50%, but as part of the criteria, if you don't come up with 50%, are you getting downscored, or how are they going, how is that criteria going to be scored? Because maybe you're only going to be able to come up with 20% match, and it may all be E and no cash. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Peggy. Kim, looks like you have an answer.
Yeah, thanks, Peggy. So we'll note that we removed cost effectiveness as a grant evaluation criteria so that until we figure out a way to do that equitably and considering that we're not going to touch it. Generally, how cost match works right now and how I would anticipate it work for place-based planning is it often is in that eligibility space. So before your grant is considered, you need to be able to demonstrate it's just demonstrating that there's commitment, right? That it's not just going to be state dollars that you're completely reliant on. And so it is more of like, you know, showing that you are ready and committed to engage in this process. And then the applications would be evaluated based on those other criteria listed in rule.
Yeah, I want to make sure that that's the case, because part of what we have continued to work on the last few years is equitable opportunities around the state for a variety of people. And there are going to be areas with more money and areas with less money, and areas with more skills to be able to write grants and areas that don't have. So I just want to make sure that I agree that there need to be some match. There needs to be some commitment beyond just showing up at a meeting. But I just want to make sure that it doesn't exclude people or groups with less money.
Yeah, and I should clarify as well, it's in the rule, but like what that looks like on the ground. So you do not need to have all of your match secured at point of application, or even have other grant proposals in the works, how we have it currently, and I would imagine it would continue to move forward. Is that sometimes you've identified, right? This is the funding opportunity, or this is the source, and we're going to go for it. Sometimes those grant cycles don't line up, but we will take it if like you have identified and clearly noted that you're eligible for that. So as a way to promote that, having that financial or other stake in it without being sort of excluding individuals.
Thanks, Kim. Debbie.
Sorry, I had to find my mute button. Are you anticipating different levels of match required for the different grant types? And when are you making that decision of up to 50%? And is that going to be in guidelines, or where is that going to be spelled out? And how often, I guess another question, how often is that likely to, or possibly changing?
Yeah, so I think it would be spelled out in the grant solicitation materials. So before, anyone could apply or consider applying, they would get the grant solicitation materials, and that match requirement would be a part of it. I think, the idea is that we have some flexibility to be responsive to like what we have in the bank, in the fund, available to fund groups, and then also responsive to any like different changes in the economy. And so how often that will change, I think is I don't know the answer to that question. I would think that, if something's working and there's not any big changes, then we just keep doing that. Or if we see that we want to be responsive to, like, we didn't get a lot of applications, maybe we're requiring too much match, we could be responsive in that way. And then I think, yeah, whether or not the grant types would have different requirements of match, I think it's a possibility that could happen, but I don't have a firm yes or no answer for you. Debbie might be frozen. Harmony.
Yeah, I appreciated what Kim said in terms of like the identification of match, and I just want to make sure that on the previous slide and the previous sections that is maybe a little clearer. I just didn't feel that it was sufficiently clear. And then on this slide, the words commitments, and it suggests that people need to know with certainty, some degree of certainty, before they can apply or get money. And I just think clarity around that is really important. And also just understanding that just how incredibly difficult it is to manage these processes, and having some grace for the people who step into the fray on this type of work.
Thanks, Harmony. Kim.
Yeah, thanks, Harmony. I also want to note a couple of items that folks have put in the chat, just so it's on the recording. Brian noted, is it possible to set a minimum match requirement of 5 or 10% match to make sure under-resourced parts of the state can participate? Peggy noted, good idea. Seeing the 50% might have groups walk away without that better understanding. So just appreciate those comments, and we'll take them into consideration.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, unless there's more, I think let's take a break. Let's take a 10-minute break and come back at 1:47, 1:48. And we'll go from there. So thanks, everyone. See you in 10 minutes. When folks get back, could they just either come on camera or give a thumbs up so I know that we have critical mass? Thanks, guys. All right. It's looking like we have most people back from the break, so let's get started. So the next piece we're going to talk about in the rules is grant administration. And again, these cross multiple sections of the draft rule, sections 3, 8, 9, and 10. Just really quickly, our statutory authority for these rules is in section 2 of the statute, which gives WRD the ability to award grants. As we go through these rules, I'll stop on each slide to see if there are any concerns like we've been doing about the rules on the slide. And then again, at the end of each draft rule section to see if there's anything additional you'd like to bring up for that section. So we're starting with section 3, the grant application process. The draft rules say that 1, the department shall periodically announce deadlines for submitting applications for grant funding dependent upon the availability of place-based water planning funds and state agency capacity to support grantees and planning processes. We're skipping 2 because we just talked about that as part of the match requirement discussion. And then sub 3 says that applications shall be submitted on the most current form provided by the department, and the department may use, sub 4 says the department may use an application review team to review applications based on the evaluation criteria in section 6. And again, these are similar to our rules for other grant programs. Is there anything on this slide that you all would like to talk about that we should have a discussion around? Yes, Lisa.
Yeah, maybe this is in another section that we're going to get to, but it seems like we're missing the well, first of all, shouldn't it say like shall review applications based on the evaluation criteria provided and shall use an application review team? In other words, like, doesn't really it doesn't really say the substance of what you're reviewing, right? It just, I guess, maybe we're going to get to that in another section here.
Do you mean like the substance of the application or the evaluation criteria?
Yeah, the evaluation criteria, but let me just hold that till we get to the next section.
Okay. Anything else for this piece? Yeah, Kim.
In the chat, Harmony notes, do you have any idea what periodic means? Maybe no less than once per year or once per biennium. Peggy says probably if/when there's money. And Harmony noted that's already in there, dependent upon future funding.
Yeah, so I think periodically means as often as we can, but it's hard to know because of that reason. Like when we have money, we'll be announcing application cycles.
I weirdly can't find my hand thing. I don't know where it went. Yeah, I think I would maybe just include language like no less than every 2 years or something. It's always going to be contingent upon, like, if you don't have money, you can't issue grants. But periodic is maybe a little too vague. I don't know how I feel about like prescribing, every year, but periodic feels too vague.
I think the other thing to note here also is that the type of funding that might be considered for each funding cycle might be different, right? So like we probably won't have a need for plan update grants for a couple of years, you know, so we won't be soliciting that grant type. So I think it gets a little complicated when we just have to be aware of that when we're putting any sort of time restriction on that there might also be a type restriction that we'd have to think about. That makes sense. Anything else? Otherwise, I'll move on to the next slide. So then moving on to sub. Was it about the previous one, Harmony? Okay, yeah, I'll go back.
Sorry, I think my interest in that is just having some degree of reliability for folks that are tracking this program of like, oh, I missed this deadline, but it'll come around again in 2 years or 6 months or a year so that people can be planning to plan. If there isn't some degree of certainty when it will be offered again, it makes it really hard for people to be responsive to this opportunity. So I would just encourage some thinking about how communication around, you know, like when people can expect this opportunity to be available. Again, all contingent upon funding.
Thanks, Harmony. That's helpful. So then, yeah, Peggy.
I'm listening, Harmony. So I would assume that this is the department's responsibility in its webpage and communication, that there be some very clear statements. It could be waiting, you know, depending on budget considerations, or I mean, there are all kinds of verbiage that could be used to at least let people know, but I don't think they can do anything beyond that. But I think they should do good communication for the reasons that you stated.
Thanks, Peggy. So moving on to sub 5. The department shall provide an opportunity for public comment on funding recommendations prior to the director's funding decision. And sub 6, the director may grant funding decisions based on the recommendations of the application review team, availability of fund resources, department capacity to support grantees, and received public comments. Is there anything on this slide that anybody would like to discuss, or alternatively, since this is sort of the end of the grant application process section, is there anything missing from this section? Lisa, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, this is probably a more appropriate place for my comment, which is shouldn't sub 6 say something like the director shall make grant funding decisions based on the standards set forth in these rules and may also consider the recommendations or something like that of the application team, because otherwise there's nothing in here that sort of says the department's going to make, the department's going to use these rules to make its decision. So I guess I would suggest that language shall make grant funding decisions based on the standards set forth in these rules. And may consider the recommendations and public comment and whatever else.
Thanks, Lisa. Kim?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I think that was an oversight, right? That those criteria and evaluations are encapsulated in the application review team, but it would be good to call that out specifically for the funding decision as well. And that's consistent with other programs to make sure that that is still considered and included. And then so thank you for pointing that out. And then I just wanted to note in the chat, Harmony asked, wouldn't it be the commission or would it be the director? And Lily, do you want to respond to that, or would you like me to?
You can, if you'd like.
So the statute gives the director the authority to make funding awards. It does not give the commission the authority to make funding awards.
so interesting. Will they be communicated to the commission? I'm like, what's the public communication around, like, around that? That's just that's so different, right, than the other funding programs, right?
Statutorily, it is different for one of our funding programs. It's something we have been reviewing with our funding opportunities. So yes, water project grants and loans, the commission is the entity that makes the funding decision.
Anything else on this grant application process? Okay. Great. Let's move on to grant agreement and conditions. This is section 8. And again, these generally align with our other grant opportunities. So sub 1 says the director or designee shall establish conditions for each grant agreement. Sub 2 says the department shall only enter into new agreements or amendments to existing agreements with prior grantees of the Place-Based Water Planning Fund if all reporting obligations and conditions under existing or earlier grant agreements from this fund have been met. Sub 3 here is meant to prevent overlap in geographic areas. So if an area is part of an existing planning process, it can't receive funding to start a different planning process. So you're sort of in the planning process that you're in. It also prevents overlap of grant types, which shouldn't be needed given the way that the grants are set up. Here, you shouldn't need to have more than one grant type at a time. Is there anything on this slide that y'all would like to discuss? Yes, Harmony.
I'm so sorry, y'all. I think it makes sense to maintain some flexibility around 3. I think the department has kind of a linear understanding of these grants as it currently stands, but I'm not sure that that's how it will play out exactly in practice. I'm wondering if it might be a possibility that there would be financial support for both implementation, coordination, and updates at the same time, or if, depending on kind of how you're thinking about the capacity grants, like that might be happening at the same time. I'm not saying that it would be like the best for one entity to hold multiple grants on this. Like, I'm not sure I would necessarily like advocate for that, but I also don't know that I would restrict it. I think it's unnecessary to restrict it in rule.
Thanks, Harmony. Other comments?
I can't find my button either, sorry.
Okay.
I could see potentially maybe, you know, a statewide organization like Sustainable Northwest or somebody that would have different be involved in 2 different efforts in different areas. So I could see where there possibly could be one entity doing, you know, in 2 different steps in different areas. I don't know if that really does need to be spelled out, or if you outline that, you know, they're not in the same area, not 2 different types of grants in the same area. I don't know. Just throwing out, you know, that really remote possibility.
Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, think about that one a little bit. This is referring specific to geographic areas, so an entity could have multiple grants in different areas, but they just couldn't overlap in those geographic areas for their grants. Harmony.
Yeah, I think this language for me is like a solution in search of a problem. Like, this is one where I'm like, I don't know if that's going to be a problem. Or like, I guess it's just about maintaining flexibility around, like, as you actually get into implementation and offering the grants. Like, I think there are maybe things you maybe haven't envisioned yet and don't want you to unnecessarily bind your own hands.
Thanks, Harmony. Kim.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think the intent behind this is in a couple of different layers. One, right, is really signaling we want to promote that collaboration. We're not going to fund multiple entities pursuing parallel things. in one time, but I hadn't contemplated until hearing the feedback, what if an entity is in the midst of transitioning its fiscal agents and how do, how do we navigate that space where sometimes in that transition, that would be a different spot for overlap versus we have found, it can be very troublesome for good grant management if an entity holds multiple grants for similar things and it gets really murky in the accounting. But I have to think about if there's that transition in fiscal agent, which a number of the planning groups have experienced, and I could see happening again in the future.
Anything else for this piece? Appreciate all that feedback. Okay. So then the fourth part of this section relates to reporting and requirements of the grantee. So A, B, and C closely align with the other OWRD grant opportunities. A, submit a report every 6 months to the department on a form provided by the department that provides information regarding the expenditure of program and match funds, progress towards completion, compliance with special conditions and requirements in the grant agreement, and any other information required by the department. B, comply with all federal, state, and local laws and ordinances applicable to the work to be done under the grant agreement. And C, account for funds distributed by the department using expense forms provided by the department. And then D is a requirement for planning groups to pursue state recognition of any plan or plan update resulting from the collaborative's work. So if a plan were to be completed and adopted, that they would then go and get state recognition or pursue state recognition. Is there any comments, concerns, feedback on this section? Yes, Lisa. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. It seems like we need something in this section. I think I copied this actually out of continued state recognition, but something that says, like a section 5 below this, that says grantee must demonstrate a continuing commitment to collaboration and adherence to principles of place-based integrated water resource planning and the state's integrated water resource strategy, or something like that, because again, like this section, which is on grant agreement and conditions, is sort of lacking that kind of substantive piece.
Thanks, Lisa.
Which applies after the plan is state recognized, but it is not reflected in this section. So I think we just kind of need an equivalency there.
Thanks. Harmony.
Yeah, I think the 6-month reporting requirement seems potentially too frequent to me. I would say every one time per year.
I'm curious to hear from folks that have been doing I think currently the ARPA grants are quarterly, which feels too frequent. I'm curious to hear from other folks that have had like every 6-month reporting. Does that seem like it's too frequent? What are sort of the benefits and costs to that frequency? Peggy.
It depends on the form. It says the department is going to create the form. If the form is simple, it's good to have accountability and for the state to have some notice that people are paying attention to the funds and doing some kind of monitoring. But it really does depend on the form. If it's complicated and whatever, then Harmony's correct. But otherwise, just knowing what happens, particularly with a group like this that may have less skills related to taking care of the money, I think it's probably a good idea. But again, it really does need to be a simplistic form.
Thanks, Peggy. Harmony.
Yeah, Peggy's question or comment just got me thinking about, like, the department. I know as when I was with the department, the progress reports, we were using them for multiple things. And so having some additional thought within the department for how, like, what is the purpose of these reports? How will they be used internally? And they do take time if you're going to meaningfully look at them and do anything about them. It does take time and capacity. And so I just put like there's can sometimes become an arbitrariness to reportingness that I would encourage the department not to become arbitrary in requiring reporting. Think very strategically about what reports you're going to require, and require them at time steps, at larger time steps, just to reduce the burden on the applicants. Unless it really is valuable at the 6-month time step. Or very simple, as Peggy said.
Thanks, Harmony.
Well, or there's two different things. One is a 6 months on the money and a 12-month on the program, which is another way to deal with it. I really am concerned. There are too many reports that you see about nonprofits and others where somebody absconds with the money because nobody's paying attention. There's all that kind of thing. I do not want to have that kind of thing happen with this program, but this is a kind of a program where it could happen because of the various skill sets of the people. So I could deal with two different kinds of reports, one with just keeping track of the money and the other with the program.
Thanks, Peggy. Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that 6 months to 1 year reporting seems reasonable based on what we require with OWEB planning and capacity type grants.
Thank you. That's helpful context.
So
Any
Brian,
other-
you have people that are not unlike the kinds of people who are going to be part of this process. Do you have experience where there is a problem with keeping track of the money?
We manage a lot of grants, and so from time to time that does come up. But I agree to your point that if there is more frequent reporting, you'll catch that sooner.
Thank you.
Debbie.
Is there is there something that asks for the frequency for the, funds requests or monetary reporting versus the progress type? I mean, it does say program and match funds in this, but yeah, it seems like at least quarterly for the funding would be, I mean, me as somebody managing funding, if I'm trying to expend those dollars, and I want to be bringing those dollars in as quickly as I can to fill in that, complete that reimbursement form. But I guess I second the more frequent funding reports as opposed to the progress reports of actual work being done.
Thanks, Debbie. Anything else? It's all super helpful. The final part of this section is sub 5, which is also sort of standard across our grant offerings, which says upon notice by the department to the grantee in writing, the director may terminate funding for collaboratives not complying with the grant agreement conditions. The money allocated to the collaborative but not used may be available for reallocation by the department. This is the end of this section, this grant agreement and conditions section. So I want to open it up for anything. If you have any concerns about this particular sub-bullet, or if you see anything missing in the section as a whole. Yes, Lisa. You're on mute again.
Sorry about that. I kind of jumped the gun earlier, I guess. I do think we need a substantive, like, I don't know that it needs to be in the every 6-month reporting, but I do think we need a substantive point either in there or as a sub 5 that says grantee must demonstrate a continuing commitment to collaboration and adherence to principles of place-based integrated water resource planning and the state's integrated water resource strategy, or some language like that, because as it's written now, you have this notice and provision for terminating funding, but you actually don't have Roy, don't explicitly say that that would be a basis for terminating funding. So I think it should be explicit in there.
Maybe adding something either about the grant agreement conditions containing that, or adding it here that it contains that language.
Yeah, I think you could do it either way. I mean, grant agreement. Where would it go if you put it into the grant agreement? Because I don't think that's a.
Yeah, we can look into it and see sort of where the best fit might be.
Yeah,
And
I
then
mean, I think there's a separate section for that, so that's why I thought it could go in here.
Okay. All right. Not seeing any more hands. So I'm going to move on to the distribution of funds, which is section 10. This again mirrors language in our other grant opportunities. 1, the director may withhold payments to the grantee if the grantee is not in compliance with grant agreement requirements and conditions. And 2, prior to disbursement of department funds, the grantee must provide the department satisfactory proof that the required match based on the total award has been secured. Harmony.
Yeah, on the second one, I would clarify that that's the final disbursement of funds, or is that any disbursement of funds?
As written, this is that would be any disbursement of funds as written.
Would make a I would strongly encourage final disbursement on this language. All the match secured before the department will spend any money is that chicken and egg conundrum that Kate was talking about. And given the nature of these efforts, I think it is incumbent on the state to remain as flexible as possible to try to attract money from others. The state will be the seed or the magnet funding for other sources, most likely.
Thanks, Harmony. And I think this sort of is similar to that other language that we just talked about in the previous section. So not seeing any more hands. So I'm going to move on to the final piece of grant administration, which is section 9, the public notice and comment section. Some more statute that's related to this is just that before issuing funding under subsection 2 of the section, the Water Resources Director shall notify county and tribal governments within the proposed planning boundary of an application. So the draft rules break down public notice into 2 parts. The first is for the award of funding, and the second is for state recognition. Both allow for a 30-day public comment period, with the award for funding including an additional need for written notice to county and tribal governments within the proposed planning area. So now I'm going to open this up for discussion. Peggy.
Why only county and tribal governments? I guess I would want all local jurisdictions to be aware of the opportunity and not just the counties. I get the tribal part.
Yeah, I think we just mirrored the language from the statute, but we could.
Well, I would certainly encourage greater notice simply because they all may have some part that they need to be having a conversation around. In order to clean up the water downstream, City X may need to deal with their sewer or septic program or whatever. I can just see, and special districts. So I'm just thinking any local jurisdiction.
Can I jump in and just, Peggy, I would like to clarify how you define local jurisdiction, right? Because that could be an extensive list, and I just would want to make sure that we understand what you're proposing, so that if it is included in the rules, which I'm not making a commitment now because I don't know the implications, that we know and that we're able, because we want to successfully implement these rules. So like municipalities is an easy one, but are you talking about all districts as local jurisdictions, or what's your definition?
So I am a land use person, and I am guessing that DLCD must have a comprehensive list. And if you provided the boundaries for this proposal, that there would be all of the local jurisdictions, and local jurisdictions, I think, is probably a state defined.
Mm-hmm.
And that it would be all of those within the boundary of this planning process.
Well, thanks for clarifying, Peggy.
Sure.
Lisa.
Yeah, I had some suggested edits to number 2 there, which is first, I think it should say prior to any decision regarding state recognition, because I mean, the way it's written now, there's only public notice if there's like state recognition of a plan. But really, I think what we're talking about is public notice that there will be a decision of regarding state recognition. So that's the first edit I suggest, prior to any decision regarding state recognition. And then I think I'd also suggest adding a second sentence to number 2 that says something like, the department shall provide public notice of any meeting where a decision regarding state recognition of a plan will be made, and shall provide public notice of any decision regarding state recognition of a plan. So, and that would, I guess to Peggy's point too, having robust public notice through the department's normal public notice system of all of these things, I think could also benefit the local jurisdictions and, anybody that's interested in this stuff. So that's it.
Would that be in addition to like the regular public notice for a commission meeting? Is that what you're thinking?
I mean, I would suggest, that it could go into the actual, OWRD public notice. That's what I was thinking.
Thanks.
Yes, because I'm going to jump in because the commission's agenda is long, and you're focusing on a group of people who've already signed up, I'm assuming, to know about this, and the public notice that you provide, or because you have so many different public notices, it would seem to me that it would have to be specific to this event.
Thanks, Becky. Harmony.
Yeah, this one's really gotten me thinking about like process flow and, just my brain is like 30 days until what? And how do we make sure that public comments actually have the ability to influence an outcome? Because I really don't believe that public comments should be sought unless they have the ability to influence things. And they should. So there should be sufficient time, and it should be very clear where this is at in the process and how public comments will be received, responded to, whatever. Because I don't want people to be commenting on an application when a decision basically is already being made or has been made. So thinking about how does this interface with the agency review team? How does this interface with the overall like review and decision-making process? Because right now it's really not clear that these public comment periods like will matter. And I think what I'm hearing from Lisa and Peggy, and I'm like, yes, is that public comment should matter. It should be sufficiently noticed, and it should be clear what decision and when it will affect. And I guess I'm feeling strongly that this should, like the grant awards, even if the director makes the decision, there should be a requirement that they're coming before the commission. I really feel uncomfortable, and I'm presuming that would happen. But I'm kind of feeling uncomfortable with that maybe happening without the commission's just even knowledge or awareness. I also think that's a really important, like, public facing forum. And since the director can make the awards, like, I do think in rule, I just would advocate that there be some link to the commission just for purposes of public, like transparency with the public. I'm feeling kind of nervous about the commission not being involved.
Thanks, Harmony. Peggy.
I'm assuming in the director's report that will be a part of the information to the commission. But I'm going to argue the other direction, that I'm comfortable with the director making the decision. I'm working with a whole lot of different agencies, and it just slows down the process if when commissions only meet 4 times a year or whatever, and have a million things on their plate. I guess I'm feeling comfortable that the director and the department can make an award after public comment related to the funding of the process and stuff. But I certainly think the commission should be notified, but I'm assuming that's a part of their reporting.
Thanks, Peggy. Any other thoughts about public notice and comment before we move on? Okay, thank you guys. That was really helpful, and we'll take it all into consideration when we update the rules. Oh, we're not having a break. Sorry, a little fake out. So that's it for the rules. We're going to make changes to it, red line edits, and we'll come back to you with those based on our discussion today. The next 2 things on our agenda, which I don't think we're going to get through, both of them, is a discussion about the expanded scope and then the fiscal and racial impact statements. But let's see what we can do with the next 30 minutes or so. So the first thing we talked about at the very first RAC meeting was section 1 of the draft rules, which is the purpose statement. And the purpose statement currently scopes the rules as establishing procedures for the administration of place-based planning and the process and integration of place-based planning into the IWRS. At that time, several RAC members were interested in exploring what it would look like to expand the scope of the rules. Specifically, items that were discussed were rules should do more to describe technical support, interagency coordination, contracting authority, and program evaluation and improvement. We've been asking for suggestions about what that might look like in the last couple of RAC meetings, and have received some proposals, which we included in a handout that was in your pre-meeting materials. And I'm going to put the link to that handout in the chat for you all to take a look at as well. Some of the suggestions were outside of the scope of what we think we can put into rule. And for those, we have described why that's the case in the handout. We've brought the other suggestions that we think, could find a place in the rules, but want to hear feedback on to the RAC today to discuss a little bit more. As a reminder for this discussion, rules interpret and implement statutory authority, and we want to hear from you, your thoughts on whether these proposed rules are helping to do that. And there are sort of two buckets of suggested rule additions, one bucket which gets at its statutory authority from the department's ability to contract directly for specific services, and one that is related to interagency coordination. So we'll start with the first bucket today, which is the department's authority to contract directly for services. There's a long list of things in statute that the department may contract for. So I've only included the relevant ones on the slide, the relevant ones to today's discussion on the slide here. And those are efforts related to interagency coordination, situation assessments, technical assistance, and evaluations to identify lessons learned and areas for improvement. And so the first proposed rule that we received is at the request of the Water Resources Commission, a commission or board of another agency, a tribe, or local government, the department may perform or contract for a situation assessment within a planning area without entering into a grant agreement. Prior to a situation assessment being performed, the department will notify potentially affected tribal and local governments. And this was proposed by Harmony, so I'm going to give her a chance to add any additional context before we open it up for discussion.
Well, let me see. Yeah, so, and I would invite Steve to weigh in too. So the department currently has, $2 million available. And when Steve and I were working for the department, we were like, gosh, gee whiz, it'd be really nice to get started on situation assessments across the state to kind of lay the groundwork for future planning and have the ability for the department to do that, not unilaterally, but essentially in support of kind of paving the path for future planning efforts. So it's really about, encouraging the department and allowing the department to do some of that early pre-planning work, especially in areas where they might know that there are significant issues, but there might be a difficult time identifying a convener or building that support, but where there's a desire to kind of get people working together more. So the opportunity for leadership from the department.
Lisa.
I guess, first of all, I don't really understand what a situation assessment is. And I kind of wonder why that's not, how does that differ from the first type of the grant that's in these rules?
Yeah, I can speak to the first part. A situation assessment is defined in the statute, but it's not in the rule because prior to this, it was not in the rules. And it means, I put it in the chat, situation assessment means an assessment conducted for the purpose of understanding the status of an issue, stakeholder perspectives, and the needs and conditions that potentially affect the feasibility and design of a collaborative process to develop and implement a place-based integrated water resources plan. In the statute, it's referred to as something that the department can do, which I think is different from the grant, that prep grant that we're talking about. I don't know if anybody has anything to add to that. Harmony.
Yeah, in the collaborative planning space, the folks who that's their profession, a situation assessment is considered best practice before you launch into a collaborative process. So, it's really laying that foundation of what's the scope of our effort, who's going to be leading our effort, what stakeholders need to be involved, what are the issues they care about, and then using that to design a successful collaborative process. And there, this is one of those, yeah, it's best practice. And we heard this from multiple professionals in this field, that before you get too far down the road of committing to a multi-year stakeholder collaborative process, you really ought to do some thinking about what the optimal design is. And in some instances, the department might actually be in a better position to conduct this situation assessment than a local entity, to help even identify like who would lead.
Thanks, Harmony. Peggy.
I guess I have two different comments. One is, I'm assuming that the department has the authority to be able to do this because that's part of their job around managing water in Oregon. So it would seem to me that if a situation occurred that might need an assessment, that the director could use the agency's resources to be able to do that. The second half of my comment, though, is the other half of what I heard from Harmony. Isn't that a part of the prep grant to find out if there is a convener, if there are people willing to do this? And so I'm trying to understand. I can see there are two different things, but I'm trying to understand what you have to say, Harmony.
Yes, it most certainly could be as a part of that pre-planning or capacity building grant. Like, this could be performed as a part of that grant. And I think what I'm advocating for, and I'm not loving this language, by the way, like this is language that I was like, I don't know, it was probably 11 p.m. and I'm like hopped up on coffee and like, how about this? So like, don't love the language, not advocating for the language. The concept is that as former department staff, it would have been awfully helpful for some really critical issues around the state if the department had taken a leadership role and had explicitly like given itself authority to use some money to just take a look at what's happening in a basin, to advise on a potential collaborative process into the future, and would love for that to be a little bit more explicit in these rules.
Kim, did you have a?
Yeah, I just wanted they hope that the department has authority to do this. We have statutory authority as drafted. This language clarifies when we could do it and is actually more restrictive than the statute currently allows, because it is at the request of somebody else versus just our own prompting, and does require that notification of the potentially affected tribal and local governments. But the statute gives us the authority to do it contracting on our own or through grants. And it gives us those choices, both tools available, which can be helpful, as Harmony noted.
Thanks, Kim. Steve?
Hi, everyone. Well, my comment is in regard to the last slide, which is just the broader list of statutory authorities for spending the fund monies on. I want the department to have confidence, and not just the authority, but also the confidence to do it and the support of the stakeholder group to do it, and the flexibility to do those things in order to better the program and to have success. And I just wonder, I guess it's really more of a question, if they're just in statute as they're written, do we have all those elements? Do we have enough detail? Do we have support? Do we have the confidence to use that authority in an effective way? And so I thought I would raise it, in that context.
Thanks, Steve. Lisa?
I do have a comment on this slide, but can you go back to the other one first? You know, there are entities that are missing from who can request this. For one thing, nonprofit organizations may not request a situation assessment. That seems like a big oversight if we were to do something like this, because I don't think, I mean, the statute does not so limit who can request this. So that would be one comment. Another is, you know, I'm a little concerned about having these kind of, I mean, there's no public notice about where these situation assessments are occurring, or there's no public notice regarding any request for a situation assessment. So it seems sort of like inconsistent with the overall framework of the rules to kind of have this put in there. So that's comment on that one. And then if you can go to the next slide that Steve brought up. You know, I guess I would have the same kind of comment here, which is, you know, who gets to make these requests? What's the process? What's the kind of daylighting of the process? You know, which types of projects get this technical assistance and this kind of funding going towards them from the overall fund that to me just feels very sort of outside of the public realm. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Lisa. Hermione.
Yeah, I think the kind of central concept here is, you know, is what Steve was talking about. And in my time with the department, you know, we were looking at direct services, for instance, through feasibility study grants. And there was the internal opinion that we couldn't, despite, you know, clear statutory authority for direct services, we couldn't actually do that because of it wasn't captured in rule. And so I am concerned that, you know, yes, the statutory authority is clear, but I've heard internal arguments against, you know, statutory authority being used by the department because it's not clear in rule. And I see this as a barrier to actually exercising some authorities in a flexible manner that are very responsive to the issues and needs that were raised by the Regional Water Planning and Management Work Group, by the you know, the evaluation by staff, former staff, etc. I would say that this is one of the things that most hindered our ability to successfully implement the program within the department. And lack of clarity around this, I think, is a significant oversight. And I think we should all be very, very thoughtful, because production of technical products, interagency coordination, all of these things on this list are some of the most significant barriers that we faced. And if the department doesn't feel like it has sufficient clarity or authority to actually exercise this, it's going to continue to inhibit department staff from being effective in their work, I believe.
Thanks, Harmony. Lisa.
Yeah, that's helpful, and it's a good reminder, because I think we all felt that pain in the Kearney early on. I think there would need to be some sideboards around what would go forward under these four, and how the department's balancing and ensuring that these are indeed, per the statute, furthering place-based integrated water resource and the balance of in-stream and out-of-stream. And so I think, you know, if there were to be any rules developed on this, I think we would need to really focus on kind of what the sideboards and the process, and, you know, I think public notice on it as well. So I think without that further work, we should just leave it at the statute.
Thanks, Lisa. Steve.
Well, if I might ask Lisa then a question, without rules, would you support that the department spend that money under the statutory authority alone?
Spend what
As it is?
money? I guess what I'm saying is I mean, the statute says what it says, right?
Yeah.
So,
So without rules, would you support the department spending it on this, on the things listed in the statute as they're written?
I think it depends on what it is. I mean, technical assistance, would I support, you know, an unbalanced expenditure of technical assistance money that's going for out of stream needs and not going to in-stream needs? No, I wouldn't. I don't think that's fair. You know, would I support a balanced program in the department helping, you know, spend money? I think we also have to look at, like, what does the legislature think this fund is for versus, you know, what would it actually be going to under these provisions? So that's just another question I would have on it.
Thanks, Lisa. Kate. Oh, you're on mute. It looks like you're muted on Zoom. We'll go to Harmony while you figure it out. Harmony, go ahead.
Yes, we faced significant headwinds in the pilot phase of place-based planning related to every single itemized list under this, subsection of the statute. And I would want to have on record that the department felt that they could exercise this authority without rules before I would say, yeah, let's just proceed with the statute. And I do think that, kind of to Lisa's point, that I do think the department will face external pressure to maybe not spend this money in the way that it is allowed to under statute, if there aren't some agreed upon rules for how that will proceed. And I think it would then be a limiting factor for the people who will be responsible for overseeing this program. I think it is one of the biggest barriers to success for this program. And in a balanced way where we've got really good state supported technical information and interagency coordination, all the things that we've been talking about for nearly a decade now.
Thanks, Harmony. Before we get to you, Kate, I just want to take a moment and alert people that it's 2:45. And if you are planning to provide public comment, I don't think we've had any requests for it so far. So we're going to power through unless we see some activity in the chat, or if you raise your hand, we can let you know. Yeah, Kim.
Yeah, I was going to say, it just sort of, if you would like to make public comment, please put it in the chat. It's there, just another reminder.
We just want to make sure we have time for it. Kate, go ahead.
Thanks. I think you can hear me now.
Yeah. Yes.
Yay. Okay. And I apologize. I had to hop off, so I'm coming into this maybe not fully apprised, but I just felt the need to say, this is actually bringing me back to the working group conversations we had, kind of bigger than what this place-based planning rules are. But I think I agree with Harmony. These, in my mind, it actually, we have a better chance of assuring in-stream and out-of-stream balance with more state support and coordination, because the state has those values at its mission. And I'm fine with public comment around this. I think that would be a good idea potentially, but having the state be able to actually not just leave communities, fund them and let them go figure it out and hope that it works, but actually be there to provide, whether it's through this or whether it's through other ways the state is able to fund and prioritize that work, but really making sure that we have the information we need and they're making sure their goals are being met, I think is really, really important. And I think back on the Deschutes situation, we had very strong state engagement with, for example, the Riverware model that helped us model scenarios and really, really helpful as far as water management goes. So I just think that's a role that the state needs to play in some way, shape, or form. And if this is a avenue for that, great. But I do think it's maybe a bigger conversation of how is the state going to support, I think, regional planning in the way that it should, making sure the state goals are met, and not just having to rely on the wonderful collaborative community spirit, but more of a partnership-based approach.
Thanks, Kate. Lisa.
Yeah, I mean, I think that raises in the place-based planning evaluation that PSU oversaw, that was a big theme from, I think, all involved, right? We needed to have that level of analysis and information starting, when we started place-based planning. Instead, we were left to try and fill in these gaps through these technical assistance grants. So I totally agree. It would be helpful to have that information. My concern is with a process that's kind of ill-defined like this, that's not necessarily aimed or does not necessarily have like an explicit goal of that. And just my experience with having these types of funding pots that are not really, publicly disclosed is that things can move forward unevenly. So that I don't disagree that having some information from the agencies would be helpful. Just how do you go about it in an equitable and fair way?
Thanks, Lisa. Harmony?
Yeah, I think that process that Lisa's talking about is really important. I agree with that. And I think, this is potentially a pot, of a place where investments could be made in the technical work. I mean, it's a pot of money. And so I'm right now I'm reviewing the state's OWRD's updated scope on the water supply and stewardship initiative. Now that's not like, this isn't the right way to do that particular approach, but there might be some creative ways that the state could use this money to actually be prepared for place-based planning. I would argue that as a state, we are no more prepared today from a technical perspective than we were when Steve and I started back in 2015, which is pretty concerning, frankly.
Thanks, Harmony. Anybody else want to weigh in on this? Yeah, Lisa.
Yeah, and this maybe goes back to the earlier discussions, but again, here we have the water resource director may use the monies by entering into agreements to do the following. So would this cover, because, I know ODF&W has done a lot of work on its guidance and, definitely helped in some of these place-based planning processes with a lot of analysis. So would this money just go to the department and external parties, or would this also cover other agencies?
Kim?
Yeah, I'll say that the statute is very broad in who it does not limit who we can enter into agreements with to do these things. And so state agencies could be on there, right? If they have the expertise and ability to do, one of these things, like perhaps not situation assessments, that's not appropriate, but right, if there is that technical assistance. And so yes, the funds could be used for that. And I would note with how the fund is, set up, we have a one-time pot of funds. We don't have a rolling pot. And right now they were put in the pot and there was no extra limitations put on it by the legislature to say if it was supposed to go one way or the other. It would be up to the discretion of the department and the director to develop a spend plan for weighing all of these things just based on the statute, unless we were to add additional clarifying rules.
Harmony.
Oh, I would argue for the RAC to work on those clarifying rules, because my fear is that this part of the statute would not be exercised without that it would just be a grant planning program, and all of the other things that have been requested ad nauseum that maybe won't happen.
Thanks, Harmony. We have about 6 minutes left. I think I want to get through one more.
Lily, I don't think we want to end on time and respect folks' time. This has been a long meeting, and I really appreciate folks' time. I don't think we have time to get through, given just how much time it's taken on each of the other items.
That's fair. All right, we are going to skip to see all the things that we were going to cover today, and skip to the end. And I'm going to skip that one too, because I've already made a decision about what we're going to do for our fourth RAC meeting. So we didn't get through everything we needed to get through today. So we're going to have our fourth RAC meeting. You should have all received a calendar hold for November 15th. It'll be a 2-hour RAC meeting, and it'll be from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. We will, in the same way we have been doing, we'll be sending out materials 2 weeks in advance. That November 15th RAC meeting, the one thing that will be different about it is that will be the last day that we'll accept any feedback for consideration in the draft rules for public notice. So ignore this like option 1, option 2 piece, but this is the timeline that we're going to work with. So October 25th, please get any additional feedback you have on what we've discussed today on the draft rules. We didn't get to the fiscal or racial impacts piece, so if you have thoughts about it, we haven't introduced it yet. You're certainly more than welcome to provide those, but we will be providing more information about that 2 weeks in advance of the next meeting. We will send out a new draft rules version November 1st. And sort of a draft fiscal racial equity impact statement for you guys to look at and react to, so that we can get to that at the next meeting. We'll have the fourth RAC meeting on November 15th. And then, like I said, that's the last day we can consider any feedback for the notice of proposed rulemaking. That notice will be published on December 2nd. That's when the public comment period will begin. You're more than welcome to provide public comment if you'd like. Hopefully you have it all. We've gotten it all in the RAC. And then the end of the public comment period will be January 15th, so that we can adopt, or we can bring the rules to the commission for adoption in March. Let's see. If you have any additional input, email that to me by Friday, October 25th, so next Friday. And if you have any questions about the rulemaking process, you can email Margot. I think that is it for the day. Thank you everyone for such like a thoughtful and wonderful discussion. We have a lot to think through, and we will be following up with you in the next couple of days with the recording from this this meeting and the PowerPoint slides and everything. And then again in 2 weeks with the updated draft rules. So thank you all so much. Have a good rest of your Friday or Thursday. So no, wait, it's Thursday. Yeah. Good rest of your Thursday. Bye everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Lily.
Thank you.
Bye.